Okay, welcome. So we will get started with Flamingo's latest webinar. So my name is Jude, and I am the founder and CEO of Flamingo. So today's webinar is really all around how to reduce calls and emails from residents with a digital resident guide. So I am going to talk through a few things. One, why create a digital resident guide, how to create a digital resident guide, and then the benefits that you should see when you really do it well. So for those of you that don't know, one, my name is Jude. I'll kind of give you guys a quick overview for Flamingo. So Flamingo is a resident engagement platform. So we work with properties all over the US. Our whole goal is really to make it much easier to be a property manager. So a couple of years ago, I spent about 4 months walking from apartment to apartment in Chicago. So pretty much went to high rises all around the city from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day for 4 months. And I spoke with a lot of property managers. And what I learned was that property managers love their jobs, but it is extremely stressful. You have stress from the manager, from the corporate, from residents, and from ownership. And worst of all, you have to use so many different tools to manage your day-to-day, and so many tools that residents have to utilize. So what Flamingo does is Flamingo offers what we call the one app resident experience. So we provide one app that's completely branded to the property, and it's everything that residents need from one place. So that's a quick overview for what Flamingo is all about. So a common complaint that we hear from property managers is that no one reads the resident guide. So residents are constantly calling, emailing, and asking the same questions over and over and over again. So why is that? The big reason is because, one, resident guides right now for most properties are PDF documents. So for most residents, this isn't something that they are going to read. Most people are not looking to read a 20, 30 page or whatever printout. So because of that, what property managers see is they are receiving calls and emails from residents constantly. And it becomes really a source of stress and interruption because it's really difficult to get anything done. We've heard from some property managers that they literally have to lock their door, pull down the shades in order to eat lunch. So it becomes really stressful if you are constantly getting interrupted by residents. So digitalizing your resident guide is really one easy way to solve part of that. It's not going to solve the whole thing, but it is going to solve a significant portion of the reason why residents might stop by the office, the reason why they might call, or the reason why they might email you. So what are some of the problems that we have with PDF resident guides or printed out resident guides? The big issue is if you are still printing out a resident guide or emailing a resident guide to residents, it's not really something that a lot of your residents are going to look at. So there are a couple of issues with PDF guides or handouts or whatever you provide residents that are printed out or stored somewhere. One of the big things is that if you are printing out resident guides, it's expensive. So you are kind of wasting a lot of paper. And unfortunately, it's not really something that residents are actually going to look at. The second reason is that if you have printed out resident guides, they are really not easy to edit. So once you've printed them out, handed them to a resident, if you need to make changes in policies, changes in documentation, or other changes, you can't go to all 300 of your residents to ask them to give you the old copy so you can update them. So it's really not easy or makes sense to have printed out resident guides just because you can't edit them. The second part is that if you are not making edits, then you have a lot of residents who have outdated copies of your resident guide. What that means is if you make policy changes, you have one group of residents that have one copy that says X and another group of residents that have a different copy that says Y. So you now have residents with conflicting information. And that leads to a lot of issues. Let's say, for example, because of COVID, you had to change some policies. Now you have all these residents with old information and potentially new residents that just moved in with newer information. So what you want to do is have a resident guide that you can edit at any time, and then it instantly updates for everyone. The last part and most important part for a PDF resident guide is that if you have a printed out resident guide or PDF guide is that it's not searchable. So if you have a 10-page, 2-page, for instance, up to like 40-page resident guides, it's really, really difficult to navigate. So as a resident, I'm a millennial, so I can say I'm very lazy. I don't want to have to read through page after page to find the information that I need. I want something quick, simple. I can find what I need just by searching for it. And that's how most of your residents are going to be. So what a lot of properties see is exactly this. This is what happens in the majority of cases when you print out a resident guide and give it to your residents. They are going to toss it. No one reads your resident guide if it's not easy and digestible. So then if you kind of think about it, for most of your renters, they are part of what we call the Google generation. So the Google generation are those people that grew up with technology. So Google has made everyone really reliant on search. So if I'm trying to find an apartment, I search apartments in Chicago. If I'm trying to do X, I simply search it. So your residents are the same when it comes to their property. So if you have a PDF resident guide that's not searchable, it really goes against what most people are used to. If a resident wants to find how to pay rent, they should be able to search your resident guide by typing in rent payment. If they want to know when amenities are open, they should be able to search that and find when amenities are open. So if you are able to build a really robust and digital resident guide, then all the questions, calls that you get from residents should drop overnight, because most people are very, very used to searching Google or other things. So as you think about like, how do I structure this? That's kind of one of the most important things to keep in mind is how do you make your resident guide searchable? So next thing I wanted to go over is what a modern resident guide should be. So what do you actually include in a resident guide? And then what are all the different features and functionality that you need to have in order for it to really become robust and usable by your residents? So the first thing is your resident guide should be accessible anywhere. So again, if you are printing out a handbook, PDF, emailing it to residents, what ends up happening is residents toss it and they are not able to find it when they need it. And if a resident isn't able to easily find the information they need, that's when they call the office or stop by the office or send you an email. But if your resident guide is accessible anywhere and it's an easy place for residents to find, then they are going to use it. So you really want to make sure that residents are able to access your resident guide from anywhere. And for most people, that means their phone. So if you make it pretty simple, residents are going to use it. The second part is that your resident guide should be editable and it should update in all locations. So really going back to the previous point is if you have a resident guide and you have policies, procedures, and all those different things residents need to know, when those things change, they should update for everyone. So it keeps all your residents with the latest information, the latest guide, the latest policies, and just the latest that they need to know. So that's a really important thing, is to make sure that as you think about like what should we use to create our resident guide, it has to be something that makes it editable. And when you edit it, it should update for all residents. So a PDF document really doesn't do that. And then the third bucket is that your resident guide for whatever platform you use should definitely have Google-like search capabilities. So as a resident or as a millennial, if I want information, I just simply want to search for it. If I move into a new building, I'm not looking to read 20 pages, 40 pages of information. When I need to find that information, I should be able to search for it and find what information I need. If it's the first of the month and I need to pay rent, I should be able to search for how do I pay rent and find it. If I'm trying to book an amenity, I should be able to search for how do I book amenities and then find that information. If I'm trying to find out when the office is open, I should be able to search for that and find that information. And by search, I don't mean flip through multiple pages to find that information. I should type it in and that information is presented to me. So that's the type of capability that you want for a digital resident guide. And the last part, which is also really important, and I'll talk about this a little bit more because this point is really important, is analytics. So if you have a resident guide or a digital resident guide, one of the most important parts of it is being able to understand which parts of your resident guide residents are actually using. And that allows you to then expand on that information. So for example, if you can see that residents are constantly looking at the information about rent payment, it means maybe there's something not clear that's there. Or maybe that's a section of your resident guide that you should add more content to. Or if you find that residents are constantly looking up information about maintenance, maybe that's a section to really build on. So by having analytics, you are able to really understand which parts of your resident guide is important, which parts are not, and then really continue to build that, because the resident guide is really a living document. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that you want to constantly update. And that's what analytics helps you with. By looking at the analytics, you then know which parts of your guide should be more helpful or are currently not helpful for your residents. And then next thing is really like, what are some of the information that your resident guide needs to have? So I see that Ashley is on our call. So one of our clients, I'm actually using their resident guide as an example. So I see that she's on the webinar at the moment. So she probably recognized what she sees in front of her. So what are some of the information that you need to absolutely have in your resident guide? So we definitely recommend having something around building services, whether it's the management team bio. So residents should be able to look on the resident guide and know who the management team is. So make it really easy, and you can kind of take it a step above and make it fun for residents. So not just add the management team bios, but also add additional information about your management team. So how long have they been at a property? What are their favorite foods? Something that really helps you connect with your residents. And then residents are able to see that information really quickly. So hi, Isling, I see this is your resident guide I'm actually showing. And then the second part is major policies. So your resident guide should absolutely have all your policies, whether it's amenity policies, parking policies, guest policies, event policies, really all the different policies that residents need to be aware of. You need to make sure those things are included in your resident guide. The next one are resident services. So what are all the services that are available to residents when they move in? It could be as simple as a welcome letter that's like, hey, welcome to our building. These are the quick things to know, to package policies, to video walkthroughs, to amenities. So really think about all the information that residents need to know. Those should all be part of the resident guide under like your resident services or something else. One thing that I really recommend is, if you are using a digital resident guide, is to think about video. So a lot of you became very used to using video for walkthroughs or other things the last 12 months. So use the same capabilities to extend things after a resident has moved in. So what about doing a walkthrough of your amenities and having that in as part of your resident guide? You could do a walkthrough of how to use common appliances. So if you have like a smart home, if you have smart home technology, if you have really complicated appliances, if you have really complicated things within the building, do a walkthrough using video of those things and add those things to your digital resident guide. A lot of people prefer to read, but for a lot of people, a video is the fastest way to access information. So really think about how to incorporate video into your resident guide. This becomes especially important as we talk about the next section. So another section to absolutely include is maintenance. So something very typical, residents are always looking at work orders, sending work orders. So one section to really focus on is maintenance. So when you create a maintenance section, you want to add a lot of content. So everything from like, what is a maintenance emergency? So that should be within the resident guide. So it's absolutely clear to residents like what is an emergency versus what is not an emergency. You then also want to include whether it's text or videos of common fixes. So really help residents like help themselves. So if there are common issues that you receive from residents about maintenance, you could add information about how residents can solve those problems themselves. So it shouldn't always go to your maintenance team to solve if it's really quick and common things that as a resident, I can fix myself. So if you provide videos, tips, or all those things, residents should be able to access those things. You could have your maintenance team literally spend just a few hours and put together quick video tips and add those to your resident guide. That should help cut down on the number of maintenance requests that you get. And then it really makes residents a lot more self-sufficient. Other things to include would be emergency phone numbers, what to do during a lockout. So really add all the issues that residents need to know directly within the guide. And then another section is FAQs. So what are the common questions that come up from residents? What are all the reasons that residents call or email you? Those are things to add to the FAQ section. And you could also upload appliance manuals. So for many of you, you have PDF documents of appliance manuals or guides. You can upload those to your resident guide so residents are able to access those from anywhere. And then another common section that we recommend is a rewards and perks section. So if you have partnerships with like local retailers, restaurants, bars, or other on-site retail, you can add those under your perks section so residents can find them, especially if those retailers provide discounts to your residents. And then if you have a resident rewards program, you can add those to that section. If you have a referral bonus, you can add those to that section. So really create a rewards and perks section that has all the different ways that residents can earn rewards. Another section that we recommend is social media links. So if you have a Facebook, Instagram, whatever, you want to add those to a specific social media section so that residents can simply click on there and it takes them to that specific social media platform and to your page in particular. So again, that's why I don't recommend using a PDF guide, just because if you use PDF or printed out resident guides, it doesn't have the functionality that you need. So residents are not able to click on the PDF. But if you have a digital resident guide, it's very clickable. You can click to websites or to other apps. So absolutely recommend having that type of functionality in your resident guide so it's easy for residents to navigate to different places they need. Another section that we recommend are review links. So if you are looking to increase your reviews on Google, Facebook, Yelp, wherever, you also want to absolutely make sure that your digital resident guide has all the links to the specific review pages. So when someone clicks on it, it takes them directly to the review section of that site. And there are different ways of making sure that that happens. So basically, you want the review links to take them specifically to the review section, not just to the general page for your Facebook, Google, or Yelp. You want the specific review section. And that's why, again, you want a digital resident guide because it allows someone to click or tap and it takes them directly to that page. Another one that's really important is a suggestion box. So as a property manager, you don't know everything. So your residents are seeing things in the community. They are thinking of things that you might not be aware of. So you want to make it really, really easy for residents to provide feedback to you on a constant basis. And that feedback is what's really going to take you from here to here. So the feedback you get from residents becomes really, really invaluable. So you want to make it really simple for residents to provide feedback. And having that ends up avoiding a lot of issues that might come up later. So as you fix things, residents become even happier. So absolutely recommend having some type of suggestion box. So these are just a few examples. For everyone that attended, we are going to send out a template that has a lot of different content and templates for different sections of your resident guide. So we'll provide that via email. So a lot of content all around some of what I just went over. And then a big tip for creating the perfect resident guide. So one thing you probably all are aware, or that happens to all of you, is residents are calling and emailing constantly. So what I say is look at all the emails or calls that residents have ever done and look at all the questions they ask. So that's all the content that should be in your resident guide. So if a resident is calling you about how do I pay rent, you need to make sure that in your resident guide, there is information about how to pay rent. If a resident calls about how do I book amenities, you should have information in your resident guide about how to book amenities. This is probably the easiest way to build your resident guide, is simply to look through the email history for every single question that residents have ever emailed, and then simply use that content to create your resident guide. So then you are not guessing at what is going to be helpful. You are actually adding content that residents are already asking for. So it's really the simplest way to create your resident guide. So literally just look through all the emails and then start keeping track of all the calls that come in. So every time a new call comes in, a resident asks a question, make a note of that. And then take that to turn that into an FAQ section or additional content on your resident guide. And this is really important because your resident guide should be a living and breathing document. So as you learn more about what residents are confused about, you want to add that content to the resident guide. And then the second most important part is how do you train residents to go to your resident guide before they call you? So what you want to do is really ensure that the first habit for a resident is to go to the resident guide before they call or email you. So that starts with how you onboard your residents. So whenever a new resident moves in, the first thing as you onboard them is to say, hey, here's our resident guide. It has everything you need to know. If you ever have questions, check out the resident guide. If you find something, then email us. So you want to really train your residents to be self-sufficient. So they should be the ones that seek out the information they need. They shouldn't be calling you guys. So that really starts with how you onboard your residents. And if you do it well, residents are going to use the resident guide. So, but it all starts with how you onboard new residents. And then as you get more questions, if you keep getting questions from residents, every time they send an email, you want to respond. You want to say, hey, here is the information that you need. And by the way, use the resident guide to find that information because it's already there. So it takes a little bit of time, but the more you do that, the more your residents start going to the resident guide before they come to you all. And that's going to save you all a lot of time. So highly, highly recommend it because your residents are like children. You have to train them right from when they move in to constantly throughout your resident journey. So then where can you create a resident guide? So there are a lot of different services you can use. Most like tech companies use something like Help Scout, Helpwise, Intercom, or Zendesk or other help software. So what those help guide or help desk software systems do is they allow you to really create a robust resident guide. So you can use those to create your FAQs, different sections, and then have a link that residents can use. And they make it really simple for residents to search and find the information they need. So it could be as simple as using one of these pre-made software systems, or you could simply just create a Google Sheet and have that hosted on Google, and residents can find it. And then for many of you already know Flamingo, but we do also have resident apps, and our resident apps come with a free digital resident guide. So residents are also able to access your resident guide directly from the resident app, and it's all free. And we have a few updates that we are actually rolling out to our resident guide, including search functionality and analytics to really help our clients know what are the common issues or which areas of the resident guide residents are really using, and then also making it really, really easy for residents to find the information that they need.